All right, good evening, team. Appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you today. Appreciate you guys all coming in, it looks like, just for potentially myself here, in regards to someone that's got a concern. My name is Brandon Guthrow, and I live at 104 Terrace, Drive in Grimsby, and have lived there for approximately 10 years. My wife and myself own Aspire Gymnastics in Grimsby as well, which locates on South Service Road and supports about 700 families and kids across the Grimsby community. So we are a taxpayer for a business standpoint, and a home taxpayer at a 50% bracket, meaning we're giving a lot back to the government as well. So today my concern is related to a sidewalk that is being put forward in my location at 104 Terrace. This location is approximately 65 years old. The sidewalk is being put in because of a new development, which we've been okay with, and I've not raised a single concern around the new development. Some of the discussions I've had with Brandon and Spencer have been productive, and I really do appreciate their support thus far. They've definitely been there to answer and support the questions we've had. So to discuss on some of the questions that have been raised and might kind of continue to escalate this and go beyond, is there was one discussion we had on sidewalks on both sides of new development, and that is kind of a standard policy and procedure within Grimsby now, where we have new development and we want to make sure that there's sidewalks on both sides. Due to safety, whether it be handicapped individuals, whether that be for strollers and young families, we really want to make sure that we respect that. I think my discussion back on that point was, being that this house is 65 years old and not part of the new development, we didn't feel that that would warrant us having a sidewalk on our location, and wasn't taken into account when it comes to the sidewalk. It was then brought forward that sidewalks end on intersections, and the reason why they end on intersections is because for future potentials of a three-way stop. In my discussions with previous councillor Kevin Ritchie, he identified that there was a very small likelihood of it becoming a three-way stop, and actually challenged the team to revisit where we were going to be having the sidewalk, whether it was in the previous street that enters on the opposite side, or to end it prior to our location, still meeting Grimsby's policy and procedures around having two sidewalks on both sides for the new development. And then it was deemed that it was more safe at a three-way stop and at a point of an intersection. My rebuttal back and my challenge back is, it's not safer current state without a three-way stop, because essentially we're still going to have cars driving on both ways through Terrace, and now you're going to have a third option where cars are turning off Lawrence as well with no stop sign. So current state is not any safer. Then it was discussed that the reason why we want to extend beyond that further is, during a new development process, the builder is required to pay. So essentially, even though there's not a three-way stop today, in the future state there could be a three-way stop. And we want, obviously, the builder to pay and not take out of the taxpayers' money. So we will run it to the intersection to ensure that if there ever is a three-way stop, it has been not coming out of the taxpayers' dollars in regards to the sidewalk. My challenge back was, can I pay, if we do deem at future state that it would require a three-way stop, could I pay at that point for a sidewalk? And the discussion there was that that's not possible, because I can't guarantee to live in that location when that time, or if that time was to arise. What then was discussed around a bend in the location, that if you are near a bend, which my house, if you can see from the diagram, is quite far from the bend, that it is safer to be as far away from the bend as possible, which I think does make sense for a safety of a pedestrian crossing a street. My ask was that we either do the previous intersection, which in the email documents you can see Kevin Ritchie also specified at the time, or we end prior to my location, again still abiding by all the new development policies around having a sidewalks on both sides without impacting a 65-year-old home in Grimsby. And then final was a consideration around house aesthetics. I think when you purchase a home that is 65 years old on a very developed street, you make the assumption that the driveway remains the same and the amount of cars you can hold on it remain the same. When you purchase a new development, you make the assumption that you're going to have a sidewalk, you're aware of that, you purchase that, and you lose a couple spots. We inserted 3 trees, which is a valid point that it's town's property, so maybe shouldn't have done that. But in discussions I had with previous councillor Kevin Ritchie and people in general on the street, is that when your house is reaching 65 and 70 years of age, it's under the right assumption to assume that you would probably never have a sidewalk at that point. So again, we did proceed to do 3 trees in our property. It was also discussed around not only a sidewalk going through the property. I think I'd be more understanding if a sidewalk was running straight through the property and straight through the street. I even said that I would be very understanding if that was the process. But it's actually ending halfway on my property. And for those that know Grimsby and know Terrace Street, we like to think it's quite a nice street. and it has a nice curb appeal, and we'd be the only house that backs onto the escarpment of one of the original lots that would have that sidewalk. Ending halfway through a property, I think everybody would agree if you were a house owner in Grimsby that you would not want a sidewalk ending halfway through your property, as it really does have an off-putting look to the house. So the options we presented was considering the opposite street, which would allow all the houses that back on the escarpment from a terrace perspective to not have sidewalks, which would stay in sync. If we do deem that it's a safety measure and we must abide by that as a new development, then we could end prior to my property, still being further enough away from the bend. Future state, if we do deem it requires a three-way stop, then we add the sidewalk at that point, and we can have the taxpayers pay for that small portion of a sidewalk. Being a taxpayer for both a business and a homeowner for over 10 years, I feel that we're worthy of paying for a very small sidewalk if it becomes a too much traffic flow. With current state on a side road, I don't anticipate it's ever going to have enough flow that's going to require a three-way stop. Being that I've lived it for 10 years and it's not a very busy road, I think that's an easy option to allow it to extend past us, which is not fair. And I think my final point is when the consideration was occurring, I think it was occurring based on the developer's paying for this, so it's an affordable option for the town. I think it's about having two sidewalks on both sides of new development, which is, again, a fair call if that is a policy procedure for the town of Grimsby. But I don't think that the current homeowner, 104 Terrace, in a house that was 65 years old, was taken into account and was taken into consideration when the discussion happened. And the very initial documents, it didn't have a sidewalk on our side, and it was added after the fact. And the concern I brought forward as soon as it was identified that we were having a sidewalk, and I think we've been going back and forth on this for probably upwards of 6 months. And I have had support from Councillor Kevin Ritchie, and since then I've been working with other councillors, and that is where I'm currently at. So my ask would be that we reconsider the sidewalk ending prior to our property, and then my ask is if that's a no, what's my next stage of escalation so I can continue to proceed? Thank you for your time, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Are there any questions for Mr. Guthrie, or perhaps for staff that might be able to clarify some of the questions or concerns about this, the sidewalk and the placement of it here? Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the protocol. Mr. Chair, through you,
yeah.
Right? I did have a question for staff, if you could explain to the committee the safety concerns and the options that were considered.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. So your question was relating to the safety concerns of why we're extending the sidewalk or why we're terminating where we are. Is that correct? Okay, so maybe I can just walk through committee and Mr. Guthrie just in terms of what we do as part of our engineering review design stage. We evaluate the sidewalks, as Mr. Guthrie said, providing sidewalks on both sides of the road is a policy of ours or a new standard for us as we move forward. Well, when we look at any sidewalk, we want to make sure that it comes to an appropriate termination point. We don't want basically if we're taking someone somewhere, we have to make sure they end at a appropriate location. So through the design stage and as well as afterwards, when Mr. Guthrie brought his concerns forward, we reevaluated our position in terms of, are we doing the right thing here? And we feel that we're sound in terms of the decision that we made and why we're terminating it where we're terminating or proposing to terminate it. So. In terms of why we're terminating where we are, as Mr. Guthrie said, that there, the intersection is where the intersection of Lawrence and Terrace Drive is where we're proposing to terminate the sidewalk. Main reason being is there's two principles behind that. Is one, we want to make sure that it comes out to a intersection, which is a normal crossing point. We don't want to provide a sidewalk that terminates mid-block. So mid-block, I mean, is in between intersections. So what that does is it requires pedestrians to cross the road at an uncontrolled location mid-block. The second point was relating to the bend in the road, the horizontal curvature, in that if we terminate the sidewalk closer or within the development on the north side or the west side of the road, it ends up becoming a potential sightline issue in terms of where the pedestrians would then be required to cross. So moving the sidewalk closer towards the development puts it closer towards the bend, which causes or could cause a sightline issue in terms of pedestrian not being able to see cars coming around the bend, or vice versa, vehicles not seeing pedestrians coming around the bend. So those are the two primary reasons why we did decide to terminate the sidewalk where we're proposing. And I'd just like to add, I completely understand Mr. Guthrow's concerns. I do appreciate that, living in a residence where, you've gotten used to a certain aesthetic at your property, the fact that we're putting a sidewalk through, I completely understand that it's a change that does impact you from an aesthetic purpose, and I do sympathize with you, but I would say, I think, just to reinforce, I think staff have made the right decision in terms of the right reason why we're doing this, understanding that it's an impact to Mr. Guthrow, but we think it's the safest termination point.
Okay, thank you. Member Spink, does that satisfy your question? Any other questions? So the question I had was, is there a significant elevation difference between the new development and the existing development on, is there a height difference in the land either way that adds to that issue, or is it just the bend that is the issue there?
No, the grading is probably it matches into the existing where it goes from the proposed development to the new development. The sidewalk elevation would be based on the back of curb, so and they match it basically up 2% grade using technical terms, but a positive slope from the resident's house or the private property down to the curb. So they'll match in the curb, and then the sidewalk will be laid out back of that. So don't see that there's a significant change in grade. It's more the safety factor is the horizontal difference, not the vertical.
So I understand staff's justification. I also understand is it Guthrow or Guthrow? Guthrow's perspective here. And we do have other places in town where we have older developments next to newer developments. Gage is one that comes to mind, where there's no sidewalk in the old part of Gage, and the sidewalk just comes to an end right in the middle of the road. And so it wouldn't be the first time if we did decide to end it on the other side of Mr. Guthrow's property. It's just something to consider. I understand his perspective. Also, if it went all the way through, then I would understand, the town's perspective better, because it would be there'd be a continuity, and aesthetically it would match up. But my concern is, mostly from an aesthetic perspective, I don't know that there's a significant, and you're the expert, so I trust your opinion. I don't know if there's a significant difference in the location between ending it right beside Mr. Guthrow's property or ending it in the middle of his property. And I can tell you that I know of at least one other example where we have gravel shoulders and the sidewalk just ends in the middle of the road. Now, it's not as close to an intersection as this one, and that could be the significant difference. That again, you guys are the pros. We're just brainstorming here, and I think that there are two sides, and I want to consider both sides of it. If you wanted to.
Sure, thank you. So the first point, I would concur with you. Thus, there are examples, and Mr. Guthrow brought up a good example of just down the street where there's a similar situation where the end point terminates right on the bend of a road. what was designed and what was approved 20 years ago doesn't apply to kind of how we do it now. So standards change, and the new standard is we want to make sure that we avoid mid-block crossings wherever we can. The second point in terms of extending the sidewalk, that was one of the options that we debated as a team, is could we extend the sidewalk all the way across his frontage, so it's not, what do you call it, a half as the frontage, it's across to the other side of the intersection, which I think makes a lot of sense. The problem with that being is then it encroaches a little bit on his neighbor's property, and do we run into the same concerns there? I could argue it's less of an impact because it's only at the corner of the property. So that is another option that it really makes sense, because the sidewalk on the north side of the road is a good location, and it prevents, if people have to cross the road, the way we've designed it currently, if they cross the road at the intersection and they're heading westerly, they have to cross the road twice. If you moved it over across the frontage, you only have to cross the road once, so I could support that. If that's the case, there would be some additional costs that I don't think we could make that developer's responsibility, but that's something that the town would have to look at, and I think that's something we can fit within our budget.
Okay, thank you. The only other thing I was going to mention was there is no stop east-west, right, on that? There won't be a stop. It'll be going south, there will be a stop. And we're going to need to sign that sidewalk anyway, probably, just because when it comes to a T like that, people might have the natural belief that cars are going to stop for them coming down the road because it comes to a T and that's where they cross. So there might be a safety issue anyway, just because there's a natural feeling when you come to a crossing in a road at an intersection that the cars coming the opposite way will be stopping for you. So we might be creating a dangerous situation there anyway. Does that make sense, what I'm saying to you?
Well, yeah, to you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. I understand what you're saying. I guess I would say the intent right now is, as Mr. Guthrie had mentioned, is about the three-way stop. We've reviewed the intersection. It doesn't currently meet warrants for a three-way stop, so I think that's a bit of a moot point, but I understand in terms of the expectation for a pedestrian to cross is much more likely at an intersection than it is mid-block. So again, that's why kind of we're pushing it towards the intersection. We wouldn't look at any painting treatments because it's an uncontrolled crossing, so there wouldn't be any pedestrian lines across there, which would, in a stop condition, you would put with a stop bar and crossing line. So, yeah. The other thing that, as a team, we've been looking towards on the horizon is doing some form of a pedestrian crossover study. So, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer than that, province came up with new standards in terms of called PXOs, or pedestrian crossovers, regulated crossings, which they basically have white signs that say you need to stop at this this crossing ahead, and that's something that is on a horizon for something for us to look at in the future, is looking at some of these locations, whether it's extending sidewalks to the proper locations or putting appropriate other treatments in where necessary. We are considering a treatment like that on Nels when we're doing the sidewalk there as well. So.
Okay, thank you. That will require some driver education too, because people, again, people who expect cars to stop and just start walking are putting themselves in danger if the drivers are not paying attention to those kinds of signs. So, are there any other questions from Mr. Guthrie or staff? Can I get a mover and seconder to receive the presentation? I got Member Rady and Councillor Cristangi. Moved by Member Rady, seconded by Councillor Cristangi. Resolved that the presentation by Mr. Brandon Guthrie will be received. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. I think staff will, take all those things into consideration, and you mentioned possibility of extending the sidewalk past the property, so is that something you'll get back to Mr. Guthrie on?
I could certainly review further with the team. I don't think it's necessarily need a report back to council, but if that's the direction of council, I can do that.
No, I mean,
yeah.
if you can keep communication lines open with Mr.
Yep.
Guthrie, and yeah.
For sure.
Thank you.
Am I able to ask just one question?
Yeah.
I did ask around a further escalation process. If this was deemed a no, what's my next stages as a taxpayer? And then secondary, was discussed around the uncontrolled location if it was to be crossing prior to the house. If we do it at an intersection without a stop sign, it's equally uncontrolled. Just want to make sure that's noted around his answer to my question. And then deeming if it goes beyond the property, I do agree, it will just turn into the next neighbor's problem. That's not what I'm looking to gain, is to have another neighbor have a similar problem to me. So essentially, it would be asked that it goes prior to the property. And then just my final question around what do I escalate next if the answer is no?
Okay, so we can refer it back to staff for further investigation. That's one step. You can bring it to council as a citizen, present before council. Are there any suggestions? Do you want to have another kick at the can, Brandon, or?
Certainly, I think if Mr. Guthrie is asking us to terminate it sooner, I think staff have made our position clear to Mr. Guthrie on a number of occasions, and I think I've been clear with council today the reasons why we're terminating it where we're terminating it. I am happy to consider extending it further if again if it's an aesthetic concern, as well as I could add to that, we understand that you had mentioned too, as well as some trees and some landscaping that's on the public road allowance, that the town is willing to speak to the developer about providing some compensation in terms of rebuilding that garden on private lands and making relocating those trees so they're outside of the public road allowance to lessen the impact and to give you some aesthetic value to that. Other than that, I think that's kind of where staff stands. I'm happy to take direction from council.
Okay. Is there anybody that wants to make a motion to do anything other than receive Mr. Guthrie's presentation? So your next steps would be to ask to be a delegation of council. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, of course.
Through you, Chair, just as per our procedural bylaw, you can't delegate twice on the same matter. So with you delegating here, you unfortunately would not be able to delegate at council either. So that would be, when it comes to staff, when it comes to policy next steps and everything, it would just be going through staff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I guess we're done, Mr. Guthrie. I thank you. Okay. Yeah, have a good night.
Can I make one comment,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair?
please.
I would just say that meeting Ontario Traffic Manual Book 15 for pedestrian crossings and Geometric Design, TAC Geometric Design Guide, Transportation Association of Canada Geometric Design Guide, if the town didn't have 65 meters of site distance available, I would think that they would have a liability for an improper design. Just stating it that way.
Yeah, I assumed that was the point, was that the design manual was taken into consideration when that crossing was chosen, so.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chair. So again, not to rehash the issue again, but we did evaluate moving the crossing closer towards the bend, and we had concerns for those reasons. We're creating a hazard where one doesn't exist, not only from the perspective of sight lines, but also in the fact that we're creating a mid-block crossing. And thank you, I appreciate your using the technical terms. So sometimes I get in trouble.
Yeah. Those are the ones that I Google and put into emails for people. put the image capture and send them to people to explain them to them? Because they come in handy, because then it's not me saying it. It's, the guidelines makes it a lot easier because it takes it out of your hands, right? It's objective rather than subjective, and I don't think that I think objectively, that's probably the best place to put it. Subjectively, you could say that it doesn't look nice. But I think objectively, you have to use the design guidelines and
Sorry, just to add one more thing, and I'm accused of talking too much. I think too, we have to be careful about the precedent that we set in terms of, I know we have some work coming on Nels Boulevard and Dorchester Drive in terms of, I understand that it's going to be a frustration to certain residents that don't want the sidewalk, and something that I did want to say, but I didn't say earlier was, in the same manner that Mr. Guthrow maybe doesn't like the sidewalk, the next owner of that house maybe appreciates it. So we have to do what's kind of best for the community, not an individual resident, again, while I understand his concerns.
Thank you. Next, we have a discussion report, DPW 2310, 2023 In-Road Flexible Signage Pilot Program. We had a list of some locations, and it was in the report. Is there any further staff presentation, or is it just a discussion?
I mean, I can walk you through what's written in the report. I have some talking points. If you don't think that's warranted, I'm happy to defer to council's discretion on that.
It might be helpful just to briefly, because everybody's new to the committee,
Yep.
just to briefly, council members have seen it because you came before us and spoke to council about it, but for members of the committee, just to get them on board with what's happening and maybe some of the locations. I know it's in the report, but if you don't mind going over it briefly.
Sure, I'm prepared to do so. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, the report provides information about our pilot study for in-road flexible traffic calming devices. As Councillor DeFlavio mentioned, the chair DeFlavio mentioned, it is an extension of an existing pilot program that we first implemented starting in 2022. Devices, they consist of plastic flexible bollards and signage which are installed at strategic locations within the traveled portion of the roadway. The devices are intended to provide a narrowing effect to the travel portion of the roadway, and it ultimately results in drivers adjusting their speed as they navigate through the treatment areas. So staff are evaluating these devices in terms of their effectiveness, and really we want to be with the forethought of, are they a appropriate tool in our toolbox when it comes to traffic calming measures going forward. So as part of the program, we monitor speed, that's before, during, and after the implementation, just to get an understanding of what the effect of these devices are. We included 6 locations in the 2022 review, and we've expanded that to 12 locations as part of the 2023 study, and 4 locations are repeats from last year. The idea is the devices will be installed this spring, and then be removed before the snow flies, essentially so they don't interfere with winter maintenance. And towards the end of the program, we'll be circulating notices to the residents to provide their input and feedback from them. We did that last year as well. We got some good feedback, helps us evaluate their perception of whether the devices are effective as well. So happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Councillor DeVoli?
Through the chair to Mr. Wharton, when this report came to council before, which was I guess the summary of the previous year's signage, it was the Winston Road one that particularly got our attention because of the speeds there and how much it brought it down. And at that time, you had said you were going to consider perhaps having 2 in that area, but I see here now you decided on 1. Can you just explain your rationale on that and why you decided to do it the way you did?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. Michael, are you on the line? Can I defer to you on that? Maybe you can speak to what we're proposing on Winston Road. Sorry, Winston Road. Sorry, Windsor.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. Through you, Chair. So
that location on Winston Road, in the 2022 pilot, had 2 installations between Oaks Road and Hunter Road. What we're proposing this year, because of the distance between the 2 intersections, we're proposing to add an additional installation. So there'll be a total of 3, which will shorten the distance between the intersections and then each of the each of the sets of the devices. So the idea there was that when we did what we learned from the 2022 pilot was that there was too much of a separation between the devices, which allowed for vehicles to gather speed, and that's one of the reasons why we assumed that the speeds didn't have or the results weren't as favorable as some of the other locations.
I'm still confused.
So, Michael, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what we're saying is we went from 2 locations previously to 1 long location with 3 spots in between. So it's Winston Road we're treating as 1 location, but it has 3 setups within that. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, through you, Chair. So we only last year we only had 1 location on Winston. That when I say location, I mean the section of Winston Road between Oaks and Hunter. And it had 2 installations in that section. So this year we are still doing that same section, but adding an additional installation. So you'll see 3 of the centerline signs between Oaks Road and Hunter Road. And that's going to shorten the distance between traffic calming devices.
So it's 3 treatments versus 2.
Yeah.
That does explain it, and now more consistent with what we had heard previously. Are there any other locations here then? We have 12 locations. Are there any others where there are actually more than 1 installation at the location?
I'll defer to you again, Michael.
Yeah, all of the locations we have more than 1 installation. Some of them are shorter sections of road, so they will have a minimum of 2, and then some sections that are quite long will have, I believe the maximum we have is 4 or 5 installations.
Any other questions for Mr. Palumbo? Mr. Murphy?
Have you considered putting them near any of the high schools? I'm over near Kerman Avenue, and I think these things were terrific, and they slowed down the speed on Kerman like there's no tomorrow. But one of my concerns has always been kids rolling out of Grimsby High, which won't happen anymore, but you've still got BT, and you're probably going to have one in the east end of town. And I thought that those would be a good place on Briarwood, and perhaps, well, I won't say anything about Main Street, that's probably not our jurisdiction, but just have you considered the high schools?
Mr. Palumbo, did you want to respond to that?
Sure, I can respond. To you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we did consider that. Ultimately, though, because it's a pilot, because the purpose of the pilot is to measure the effectiveness of the devices, we were looking for locations that would be suitable to get that information back. So what I mean by that is, what locations do we have that experience a higher percentage of vehicles that are traveling in over the speed limit, because those are the individuals that we're looking to really target. If we're putting them in locations where, say, we have a smaller percentage of high vehicle or high speeders, it's difficult to assess the effectiveness of that, because there's not as many instances, so we won't get nearly as good data as we would for, say, some of these other roads where you could have maybe 100 in a day. and some of the lower speed roads, you might have a handful.
Now, the speed measuring, that's passively, right? It's hidden, or for lack of a better way of putting it, just to get accurate data so that it's not a big sign that says you're going 60 kilometers an hour. So that way you actually know before, during, and afterwards, you can actually measure the success or failure of the program. And the only other thing that I wanted to ask was there any consideration of bump outs? In Hamilton, I'm thinking of Hamilton, there are some, the same kinds of white posts are used to create bump outs on roads, so cars have to slow down significantly, especially on bends and things like that. I'm thinking down by Bay Street, there are parts where you have to slow down significantly because of those bump outs. We all know that cars on roads slow down traffic. Some of these roads, like Roberts Road, I think of, that I drive down every day, not a lot of parked cars, and therefore not a lot of things to slow down traffic. So anything that we could do besides just a sign in the middle of the road to slow down traffic, that isn't a speed hump. It isn't going to create noise and create all those other things, issues that go with it. I'd like to see more than just that, so even if it's just a pilot to say, let's try it on this road and let's see how it works, and then we'll try it again somewhere else next year in a couple different locations. Was there any consideration of doing something like that?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair, that's something we can take away in terms of looking at, I think what you're referring to is like maybe on curves and corner radius is slowing the vehicles from kind of taking the corners too tight. We are evaluating, as we're doing the Nels Boulevard review, we have had some traffic studies in those areas, and part of some of the improvements that we're proposing on Nels is doing some radii reductions in terms of tightening the roads to try to create that narrowing effect again. Also, on a kind of more of that, I guess that's more of a permanent solution, as well as we're looking at Central Avenue and Marlow. We're doing a road reconstruction there in the next couple years, and we'll be looking at an opportunity for doing some permanent bump outs in terms of curb work at the intersections. But certainly we can look at the temporary setups in the future as we move forward.
Yeah, we have very few opportunities as a municipality because most of the streets that have high pedestrian and bike use are regional roads, and it's just where we have an intersection of those roads with town roads that we actually get a say in the matter sometimes. But anytime we can on our own roads make it safer, I'd like to do that. Councillor Cristangi?
Through you, Chair. Just to touch more on that, some of the streets in the neighborhoods that we don't think of a lot of speeding on, in particular, I want to say Elizabeth Street down by the pump house, neighborhood area, no sidewalks, very family-oriented area. But with the pump house being a rentable space, and then with the restoration of the creek and stuff, a lot of traffic goes down there through the weekends and stuff for events, and there's a lot of reports of speeding and stuff like that. So I know the signage thing, it's strategically in certain areas, but if we can sort of pinpoint some of those areas in the neighborhoods that get a higher volume because of event space and stuff like that.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. We also have, just to add to the, in addition to the pilot study, we also have mobile radar boards that were in rotation. We're purchasing, I believe, 2 additional ones today. I see Mike's got his hand up too. We're purchasing 2 additional ones as well, and they'll be in the rotation in terms of, another one of the items in our toolbox, as well as Michael's probably going to fill me in that we do various traffic studies in certain areas, and that's something that we could maybe look at. But Michael, if you wanted to add, am I okay to defer to Michael as well?
Mr. Palumba?
Yeah, no, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I just have two. I have 2 follow-ups. One was with regard to your concern with the bump outs or the lane narrowing. For the pilot, all the installations we have will feature a centerline sign and a white bollard on the edge of the lane. So that way we can narrow the lane down to a particular width. There are some instances where we'll have to use more than one lane bollard to narrow the road as you approach the centerline sign. So for example, on Roberts Road, because there is on-street parking on the one side of the road, in order to avoid parked vehicles parking close to the installations, well, we set up what's basically like a tapered lane with the bollards down a certain distance away in order to prepare vehicles to enter into the installation and to avoid anybody parking on the side. So you can just be assured that there will be lane delineators installed as well. The other point, the other comment was about the Elizabeth Street concerns or other types of concerns for similar areas. That's kind of the reason why we're doing a pilot such as this, is that we want to have cost-effective traffic calming options available to us for areas such as Elizabeth or other low-volume roads that might not meet traffic calming warrants. And this could be an option that we could install something quickly to help mitigate some of these concerns in some of these areas. And doesn't have to necessarily be a permanent installation all the time.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Howe, and then Member Spink.
Are there optimum timelines for the installation of these pilots? Is there a minimum amount of time that you need, or maximum amount? Are there some cases whereby everybody's doing exactly what they should do? Are we able to pull it out of that and install into a different location that maybe is more, but obviously being abused?
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Chair. There is no, well, for the pilot program itself, we're aiming to have these installed through the spring and summer months, as those are that's the time of year when we receive the most amount of calls and concerns with regards to speeding. It's also when we would see the higher travel speeds because it's nicer weather. They don't have to worry about poor road conditions, and it's also concerning because we have more vulnerable road users out using the roads as well. But the nice thing with this type of traffic calming device is it's something that you can move quickly. They're just bolted down into the road. So if an installation was found to be problematic or it was time to have it removed, it could be removed quickly. And if another location came up that required some attention, we could easily have something similar installed within a day.
Thank you. Member Spink?
Yeah, I'm just trying to come up to speed on the traffic calming policy and where the pilot fits in with future permanent traffic calming, and will there be a recommendation at the end of this pilot in terms of permanent installations?
If I wait long enough, Michael, jump in. Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of this device, let me back up. We do have a traffic calming policy that was developed by a consultant and was, benchmarked against other municipalities and standards that other municipalities use, so we feel it's an industry standard. It was approved by council a few councils ago, but that is the measure that we use when we get complaints about speeding. That's the warrants that we review and escalate if needed. The bollards are, again, a pilot study for seeing how successful these are. Will this turn into a full-time program? Depending on the success and the will of council and the feedback from the residents, I think that is a possibility. Could we expand it further? Again, I think another consideration would be, I think the answer is yes, but also we have to be cognizant of they do take some time to set up and take down and monitor. So I'm just worried about the resource side of things. If we morph this from 12 to 30 locations, it just becomes difficult for our operation side of things to manage. So. In terms of long-term planning, we have in our budget this year to do a transportation master plan for the town of Grimsby, and part of that will be not in the traditional sense of a transportation master plan. We expect that we'll be delving into some of the policy-driven decisions in terms of traffic calming measures, sidewalk connectivity, criteria for when we urbanize, when we don't urbanize, that kind of thing. But I do feel that that the traffic calming permanent or temporary measures will be a strong consideration as we move through that process.
So through the Transportation Master Plan, as opposed to as part of a report on this pilot, is what you're anticipating? In terms of recommendations about permanent installations, which you don't have to put up and take down every year? Oh.
It flashes at me when I through you again, Mr. Chair. The intent here is this is an evaluation of these devices as one measure of our toolbox. In terms of the larger toolbox and what we do in terms of our implementation, again, I think that's where we go through that screening tool in terms of our warrant criteria, and I think we're open-minded in terms of what are the different mechanisms or what are the different tools available to us to control or to calm traffic, everything from, the pilots to the paint line markings to the signage to curb bump outs to in the worst case speed bumps or speed humps. We do have those in town. We are considering them in certain areas where the what do you call it, the warrants are met and where it can be supported as it meets the criteria that we're working on. Does that better answer your question?
Any other questions? Member Murphy?
I pressed the wrong button, sorry, being a novice here. Have you ever considered doing a press release on this? Just a few paragraphs for the local, newspapers, or you assume that Mike picks it up, because I think they're a great idea. And yet last year when, and I do look at Grimsby News, et cetera, and I pulled onto Kerman Avenue and I thought, what the hell is this? And then it was obvious what it was, but just an idea.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I know we, last year, I believe we sent notices out to the residents in the affected area. I believe we posted on Twitter, Facebook, but I'm not sure we did any newspaper postings, but that would be something for us to consider in the future as well. I do agree that the more word that we can get out there, that we are listening and we're trying to look at tools that'll help control traffic, I think the better. Thank you, I appreciate those comments.
Thank you. Okay, I have a motion to accept the report, or receive the report. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Davoli and Member Spink. Moved by Councillor Davoli, seconded by Member Spink. Resolved that report DPW 2310, 2023 In-Road Flexible Signage Pilot Program dated May 23rd, 2023 be received. All in favor? That's carried. Next, we have DPW 2311, disposal of surplus lands at 16 and 17 Bell Avenue and 7 and 8 Tour Avenue. Would staff like to provide any additional information on the report?
Sure, if you don't mind, I can walk you through again.
Go ahead.
If that's okay. So again, this report details land parcels that staff have identified as being surplus with no future benefit to the town. The 4 individual parcels of land are located at 16 and 17 Bell and 7 and 8 Tour Avenue. We provided copies of the images in the report which show the lands in question. The lands are essentially an extension of the road allowances that were previously needed to support cul-de-sacs at the dead-end roadways between the two of the subdivisions. And that was in the subdivision roads were extended in the late 90s. The original subdivision that the cul-de-sacs were in was in the 1950s, 56, I believe. Once the second phase of the development occurred, the roadways were extended and the cul-de-sacs were essentially removed. However, the lands remained that were there at the bulbs. Basically, it came to the town's attention when we were reviewing a minor variance application for one of the affected properties, and essentially we identified that and said, yes, it's impacting this resident. When we looked into the details a little bit further, we basically came to the decision we should have caught this earlier. Therefore, the town has identified it affects this resident as well as 3 other residents in the area. We felt it was best to just try to tackle all of these at once and get it as a housekeeping matter kind of off the books. So in terms of the process, normally surplus lands are disposed of through public tender. In this case, because the lands are wholly contained within each of the individual property owners, there's no benefit to anyone other than either the municipality or the resident. The municipality saying it's no benefit to us, therefore we're suggesting that the public tender is foregone and that these lands be transferred to the property owners in question for a nominal fee. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Wortman? Seeing no, oh, yeah, Mr. Murphy?
Just out of curiosity, was there a transfer of title when the original lands were taken over by the town? Or was that land previously owned by the builder and then went through that sort of? Yeah.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So the lands in what I can see is in the 1950s. Essentially, they created a subdivision development lands registered, and the lands had extended right-of-ways to accommodate the round part of the cul-de-sac. So those lands were deeded to the town or transferred to the town at the time of the original subdivision. Now we need to remove those and transfer them back to the landowners that there's no value for us anymore.
Just only asking because I noticed there's a $10,000 legal fee involved in the transferring them back to the owners.
Did you want to comment on that?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. I acknowledge that, yes, there is a cost to the town for this. Again, I think there's options here where we could say, well, it's no benefit to the town, and if this resident wasn't to come forward, we wouldn't have thought of this or wouldn't have brought it to the forefront. I think our staff has reviewed it, our team's reviewed it, and came to the opinion that, listen, this should have been handled previously. We're not sure this should be the responsibility of the landowner, so that's why we're recommending, us paying for the cost, the town paying for those costs of the transfers. But I do agree that the point is taken.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Got Rady and Kristangi. Moved by Member Rady, seconded by Councilor Kristangi. Resolved that report DPW 2311 disposal of surplus lands at 16 and 17 Bell Avenue and 7 and 8 Tour Avenue dated May 23rd, 2023 be received, and that 1, lands identified as Part 1 and 2 on Figures 1 and Parts 3 and 4 on Figure 2 of the report be deemed as surplus and offered to the respective property owners in accordance with the bylaw number 0776. All in favor? That's carried. DPW 2312, Public Works Advisory Committee disbandment.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, this will be a quick one, essentially bringing a report forward for consideration of disbanding the Public Works Advisory Committee. As you may know, we did 2 rounds of recruitment for this particular committee. Both the recruitment process had found an insufficient number of applicants who expressed interest in participating in the committee. I hope it's nothing to do with a lack of interest in public works, but maybe we're thinking that it has maybe something to do with the fact that there's 2 committees named Public Works, whether it's advisory and standing, and whether there's some confusion there. Also, just to add that we do have lay members on the committee now, so we do feel as staff that there's accurate representation from the committee. I know that's not the word, but anyway, sorry, from the community. We did say too that there may be opportunities in the future for us to have develop working groups in the advisory capacity for certain projects as we move forward. So this is I guess a short-term decision in terms of disbanding the committee, and there may be an opportunity in the future to bring it back up if there's a need. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, I would imagine that we could do something neighborhood-specific perhaps in the future if there's large projects that we have to do, but any other questions for Mr. Wortman? I need a mover and seconder, please. Member Spink and Councillor Howe. Moved by Member Spink, seconded by Councillor Howe. Resolved that report DPW 2312, Public Works Advisory Committee disbandment, dated May 23rd, 2023, be received, and that council approve disbanding the Public Works Advisory Committee. All in favor? That's carried. We had some correspondence, Niagara Region implementation of red light cameras across Niagara. So we have correspondence regarding the red light cameras across Niagara. Can I get a mover and a seconder to receive that? Moved by Member Cristangi, Councillor Cristangi, seconded by Councillor Howe. Resolved that correspondence from Niagara Region be received. Any questions or comments on that correspondence? All in favor? That's carried. Is there any other business members would like to bring forward? Seeing none, the next Public Works Committee meeting is scheduled for June 26, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. I do want to thank everybody, the new members. I want to welcome you to the Public Works Committee and thank you on behalf of the town. One of the reasons why I ran, and I think a lot of members of council ran, was to get people more involved, and I'm happy to see members of the public that are able to be part of these committees, and I'm looking forward to working with you for the next 3.5 years. So have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you on the 26th. Meeting's adjourned.